This podcast contains explicit content and is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Don't say we didn't warn you.
Hello, hello, hello. My name is Madison.
And I'm Hannah.
And you are listening to Who's Knocking?
A true crime podcast.
Yes. Welcome, everyone. We are back for another episode.
Yes, we are here with our gin mixed drinks, just so you guys know.
Yes, but I kind of don't want to say anything about it because I don't want them to get sold out everywhere.
That's true. They're on camera, though. Don't look.
They're delicious.
They're amazing.
Not sponsored. So I have a really interesting story for today.
I'm excited about this one.
I've been working on this one for a very long time.
You have. We're doing a deep dive.
Yes, this is what we will call a deep dive. This will be probably 3 to 4 episodes. And it is a very old case, and it's technically solved, but we are going to go over the idea that the person who's currently serving time for this crime may not be guilty. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. We don't know. I think this is something that people are still somewhat unsure of, although many people feel that they are sure. And
it's controversial.
Yeah, and should we get right into it? Are we ready
Let's
to get
into it? Yeah.
Okay, so
who's the guy?
So we're talking about Jeffrey Macdonald.
Yep.
This is a very old case. It happened in 1970. Now, this is a little bit historic for Hannah and I because a long time ago, Hannah and I both read this book, which is called A Wilderness of Error, and it is by Errol Morris. Errol Morris, I'm a pretty big fan of Errol Morris in general. He's a documentarian, filmmaker, also a writer.
Best known for Thin Blue Line.
Yes. And I think that...
And the unfinished Ed Gein project.
Yeah.
I told you about this.
Yeah,
Him and Werner Herzog were going to do a whole project on Ed Gein. They were going to exhume his mother's grave to see if Ed Gein had actually previously done so. But then for whatever reason, the project was scrapped.
Yeah.
Side note, but...
And that sounds extremely interesting. Maybe we should take over the project. I don't know.
Maybe we should.
I don't know how to phrase it. I don't love Ed Gein, but I love the story of Ed Gein. I really want to do Ed Gein if anybody is interested.
Yeah, we definitely should. But so Errol Morris, he's really well known.
Yeah.
Wrote this book.
Yes, and he wrote this book, and I knew nothing about it. I think you read the book before I did, and
Maybe.
then you recommended it to me. And I knew nothing about the Jeffrey Macdonald case beforehand, so to me, he really set the scene for me.
Yeah.
Although, later I learned that he seems to be a bit more of a controversial figure within the story. We'll get into it, but I am going to start with... So I read both books, and I'm kind of going to go through the first book, which is Fatal Vision, and it's written by Joe McGinnis, and this was written first. And the author, Joe, got involved in the case during the main trial. There's been Jeffrey Macdonald has gone through a number of different trials, which I will obviously get through. But the main trial, Joe McGinnis came in partway through that trial, and they did a book deal, and the deal was basically that he would give Joe access to everything. He was basically on the defense team and followed them around for the entire thing. And Joe was to get complete control over the book, and he claimed that he went into it with the presumption of innocence that a jury member would go into it.
Right.
And he was to write whatever he felt as long as it was an accurate representation of Jeffrey's life and his essence or whatever. We definitely will get into that specific contractual piece because later there is some drama. But for the purposes of this episode, I think will probably be 2 episodes based mostly on this book.
Okay.
Very
Madison's
long book.
holding the book, if you guys are on audio.
Yeah, if you're just on audio.
It's a fat book.
It is.
How many pages?
953 pages.
I mean, that's a book.
So it was a lot. It was a good book. And yeah, we'll get into it. So in terms of a rating for this
Okay.
one, I would say, like, so the murders are pretty gruesome. Like, there is a
Should
murder.
we say what happened right now, or that's gonna
No,
come in
I'll
later?
get to it.
Okay.
Don't you worry.
Okay.
But I would put this, I don't know, I think I'd rate this, like, pretty, it's hard because, like, the initial crime is, like, pretty gruesome. But then, like, you know, you go on because it's, the question is, did he do it, did he not do it?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, that's not freaky, it did he or didn't he? So I think the actual murders are
Pretty
like,
bad.
it's like, I would say it's like a 6.
Okay.
For anybody, I know we have a warning at the beginning, but the crime scene is gruesome. The autopsy report is gruesome. There's children involved. Like,
Yeah.
it's very upsetting.
For sure.
And I think I've been, like, extremely desensitized to it after reading this many pages. And,
like
you know,
1,500 pages.
it still definitely, like, gets me hearing the families talk about everything, and, you know, it's very, very upsetting. But please let me know if I'm not being sensitive enough, because it is very gruesome.
See, like, I know a little bit about the case. Like we said, we had both read the Errol Morris book, so I know Errol Morris's narrative of what happened. I don't know Joe McGinnis's, and obviously I don't know the truth, I guess, as nobody really does.
Yeah, nobody does.
Except for Jeffrey Macdonald probably knows the truth, since he's the questionable perpetrator. But for me, like, and I'll tell you, like, my definitive rating as we get through it, but I don't see it as that bad, because, I mean, not that it is horrible, but I don't see it as that high on the scale, because I'm thinking, like, Ted Bundy, dude, like, stalked and murdered so many women. I don't know.
If you're looking at it just in terms of, like, the person or persons who committed this crime against these 3 people,
Like, how messed up was the person?
Like, the crime, I would put it at, like, a 6 or a 7.
Got it. Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
And you're a mom, so anything with kids is
absolutely.
like, yeah.
And this entire episode, I feel like, will probably be like a 4 or 5, just because, like, the amount of talking versus, like the ratio of, like, talking to, like, crime. But I mean, after the first episode, I think it's gonna be pretty gruesome.
Okay. I mean, realistically, like, everything could be a 10. Everything's really bad.
Yeah,
So.
especially to the people that it happened to.
Yeah,
you know?
that's for sure.
So let's get into it, and I'm very curious to see what others think.
Cheers.
So, without further ado, this is the case of Jeffrey Macdonald. So, Jeffrey Macdonald was born in Jamaica, Queens, New York on October 12th, 1943. His mother is Dorothy Macdonald and his father is Robert Macdonald. He was the middle child. He has an older brother named Jay Macdonald and a younger sister, Judy Macdonald. The family grew up quite poor. They were very working class. The father was extremely strict but nonviolent, and he demanded a lot from his children. Jeffrey seemed to take this in stride, and he was a very hard worker. Like, it seemed to really propel him into being a good kid who did really well. He excelled in school, both academically and socially.
Okay.
In high school, he was president of the student council, and he was voted most popular and most likely to succeed.
Wow, okay.
Which is, like,
popular.
a lot.
Yeah.
He had a lot of friends, and he had a lot of confidence, and he thrived, basically.
Not the usual weirdo that we would discuss.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's, like, one of the really interesting parts about this case.
Yeah. He's not picking up dead crows he finds on the ground and putting them on his teacher's desk.
Not chopping off arms or anything.
Shout out Herb.
Yeah, I don't know if Aidan listened to that one yet, but Jeffrey had described his father as the most influential person in his life and probably in the lives of his siblings. It was very clear that all 3 of the kids, at least the 2 boys, were, like, they really respected their father.
Okay.
And it definitely seemed like a very weird relationship, because the father seemed like not a very loving guy.
Yeah. He was like a tough dad.
Yeah, very tough. Very tough. Non-violent, but very tough. His older brother, Jay, was very obviously the favorite of the father.
Oh.
And it was something that, like, was just everybody knew. And this led the boys to have a bit of a rivalry. And Jeffrey always really strived to outdo his brother, or at least, like, get up to his level. I think that his brother was a football player, so, like, as popular as I said that Jeffrey was in school, I think the brother was like at that level or even more.
Mm-hmm.
And this was something that clearly had a big effect on Jeffrey, but he seemed to take it and like make it work for him.
Okay.
And like led him to be very successful instead of letting it make him resentful.
That's cool.
Which, like, good on you, Jeff.
Yeah. So far, very normal.
Yeah, I'd say so. Jeffrey's like thought very highly of his father, and even though he did say that his father was very domineering and had very old-fashioned views both on women and like racial relations.
Interesting.
He said that in the book he recalls one specific instance when he was in university, and I don't remember. He went to 2 different schools, so I don't remember which school it was at. But like his father and mother came to visit him and Colette, who you'll meet later, and they were at a restaurant, and the father was like really rude and upset to be being served by a black man.
Wow, that's fucked.
Which, and at the time, like, you know, like Jeffrey's in university, like that is like very outdated in the like circles that he was in like an Ivy League school.
Okay.
And so he's like really embarrassed about this, but also like not willing to stand up to his father. So it was like, I think it led to like a weird relationship where he was like, where he was like, he respected his father very much, but also was like getting to a point where he was embarrassed about the way that his dad was behaving in the world.
That's embarrassing.
Especially because his dad was like a very blue collar worker, and he was, we'll get to it later, but he was in medical school at the time. So he was like really excelling in like a very academic, very like progressive time. Mm-hmm. So that was really weird. And then his dad died in his 50s of pulmonary fibrosis.
Shit.
So that was shitty. And then after the death of his father, Dorothy, the mother, had noticed a very steep decline in Jay, the older brother, in his emotional well-being. He was getting super into drugs, and he had experienced what doctors told her was a schizophrenic break.
Oh, shit.
And ended up attacking Dorothy on a street corner.
That's insane.
Yeah, so he took like a absolute nosedive mentally and emotionally.
Yeah.
Which was really crazy because he was like the golden boy of the family that everybody looked up to and blah, 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 whatever.
Yeah, like that's no joke.
And the events that took like this break that he had, that he ended up attacking his mother, happened at the same time as the murders that occurred.
Shit, really?
So the poor mother is
oh my God.
by herself. She's a widow at this point. She just gets attacked by her older son, and then hears about the like absolute tragedy that happened with her other son, and she's like, I can't be in 2 places at once. Like, what the hell do I do?
Yeah.
But needless to say, it was at this time that Jay took a steep decline, and he essentially became like a dependent on his family, or like somebody that they had to like constantly be watching out for and like scooping up from places. He was like getting in fights and like doing all these drugs. And
man, what a turn.
Yeah. And we'll get into a little bit more of like the time, because it was during the time of the Vietnam War and like blah, blah, blah. There's
right
lots
at the
of drugs.
end of like the counterculture movement.
Yeah. So
Summer of Love.
There's a lot of drugs.
Yeah.
We'll say for now.
Not the fun kind of drugs, probably.
I feel like kind of out of breath for some reason.
So much talking.
I know, and I have a lot to say, so better get ready. Okay, so Colette Stevenson was her, not her married name. Her married name would have been Colette MacDonald, but her
maiden name.
We'll call her Colette Stevenson for now. And I'll talk a little bit about her family first. So her mother is Mildred Kassab, and her stepfather is Freddie Kassab. And they're pretty big characters in this whole situation.
Okay.
So Mildred's first marriage had been to a man named Cowles Stevenson. Cowles is a pretty interesting name. I've never heard it, but it's like Cowles. Pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
I really like names that are just like kind of random that I've never heard before that like sound like a last name.
Yeah, agreed.
I really like last names as first
cool
names.
and unique.
So I kind of like that. So she had been married to Cowles, who was 10 years older than her at the time. And as soon as they got married, Mildred really wanted a baby right away. She specifically really wanted a girl, and she immediately became pregnant. And Mildred decided right away that if the baby was a girl, she was going to name her Colette. And as it turned out, the baby was a girl, but she was stillborn. And this was the first Colette. Mildred's second pregnancy resulted in another baby girl, also named Colette, and also stillborn.
Oh, so sad.
1 year later, there was a third baby girl, again named Colette. This Colette managed to survive childbirth, but she ended up dying a few weeks later following a surgery to relieve an intestinal blockage. Now, that is fucked.
Yeah.
3 babies. She got pregnant, carried these children for 9 months, 3 times, all for them to die. That is unimaginable to me.
Yeah, so sad.
Horrific. Mildred finally had a healthy baby, a boy named Robert. So all she wanted was to have girls. She had 3 girls. All of them died. And then she had a baby boy. And then 4 years after the baby boy, she finally gave birth to the real Colette Stevenson. And this is what Fatal Vision, this was like the Fatal Vision series of events. Mm-hmm. I will mention that in an interview that I was watching today, many, many years later, of Colette's brother, Robert, he says offhand that Colette was not like Colette number 3. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if Joe is mistaken because he has her as Colette number 4.
Right.
Or if the brother like just by accident said number 3 when he really meant number 4. I don't know.
That's like all these, so many times when I do research too, there's kind of like.
Well, yeah, because like you can't just, you can't fact check everything, whatever. Right. But I will just mention she was either number 3 or number 4. But Joe is pretty like detailed about all the different miscarriage, not even miscarriages, stillborns, which is just so sad. Mm-hmm. But needless to say, that was horrible. Mm-hmm. But she finally ended up with her baby girl. Cool. Finally got her Colette. Good for her. And then, on an evening in spring of 1955, Mildred had returned home. She opened the door to her garage, and inside she found Cowles hanging from the rafters in his bathrobe.
What the fuck?
He committed suicide. He left no note. She claimed that there had been no sudden trauma. She told her friends and family she had no idea why he had done it. Colette was 11 at the time and Robert was 15.
Sounds dramatic.
I mean, perhaps it had something to do with the multiple stillborn. Like, that does shit to a person.
Yeah.
That, like, to give birth to a dead baby and then to have a baby who survived and then it had surgery for whatever reason and then died. It just makes me want to cry hearing about that. Aww. It's just horrific. But anyway, so things were pretty tough for Mildred.
Yeah, I'd say so.
That was that, that's I don't know how people deal with stuff like that, to be honest.
Yeah.
I will end my saga there. Now, Freddie Kassab was born in Montreal, Canada. Mm-hmm. Shout out Canada.
Yep, we're there.
He was born to wealthy Syrian parents. At 18, he enlisted in the military and was assigned to intelligence work. He'd been wounded multiple times during the war, and when he was on a mission in Italy, his young wife and daughter were killed by a German bomb dropped in London.
Shit.
So that is horrible. And so Freddie had become a widow. He'd remarried another woman. They had no children, and then they ended up getting divorced. And then finally he met Mildred, who already had 2 children, and they got married. So 2 widows, both with dead children, got married. And Freddie treated Mildred's children as if they were her own. And him and Colette got along really, really well. From the very beginning, they were super close. When she obviously grew up and moved away, he would call her from his office at least twice a week just to chat with her every single week up until the point where she died. And you will see he was a fantastic stepfather to Colette and presumably her brother as well.
So awesome.
Yeah. So both of Colette's parents.
A few positive notes in the story.
Yeah. There's lots. There's a lot of good people in the story. It's hard too because there's very much 2 sides to every story. So I think Freddie is one of the most.
Everyone kind of likes him?
No.
Oh.
He is one of the most polarizing characters.
Okay.
And personally, as a parent, I don't see much wrong with anything that he did. Mm-hmm. But we will get into it. He was very aggressive.
Okay.
But I mean, we'll see. But at the end of the day, during the time where they were a couple, Colette's parents really, really liked Jeffrey. They loved that she was with somebody who was like such a great person who was providing for their family and blah blah blah. They like were huge Jeffrey fans.
Nice. Well, didn't end great. Did you say how they met? Like how Colette and Jeffrey met?
That's where I'm about to get to.
Okay.
So that's like mostly the parental situations. So, but I will get a little bit more into Colette and her mother's relationship.
Okay.
So it was alluded to in a lot of my research that Colette and her mother had like a bit of an odd or strained relationship. And a lot of this is...
see that.
Yeah. And I'll tell you why. So I speculate that Colette had some judgments toward her mother about the way that she tended to live her life.
Oh.
So as I said, Jeffrey's family was a very like blue collar family. Like they were a hardworking family. They were a very no frills bunch. Mm-hmm. And I think Colette became really close with Jeffrey's mother and like became like really close with his family. And I get the sense, and this is my own speculation and opinion, that they were very different from her family, and she really liked them and really liked their kind of way of being.
Yeah, they're like a practical family, minus the brotherly attacks. But.
Yeah. I think they were like that's a really good word to use for them, is like practical.
Mm-hmm. Practical and a little racist, whatever.
Yeah, and I think that like it's hard too, because like me looking at that, I'm like, yeah, that's like super racist. But like at the time it was still outdated. And, like, it was still, like, it was, like, the 70s.
Yeah.
At the time of the murder. But, like, at the time leading up.
Yeah, like, racism was pretty acceptable in the 60s.
Yeah, and I don't think, like, Jeffrey and Colette, like, found that acceptable. Like, clearly, like, they were, like, legitimately embarrassed by it.
Right. But for the parents.
But, yeah, they were, but... I think it was mostly weird for Jeffrey because he respected his father so much.
Yeah.
And I think that Colette saw him really respecting his father, and like that made her respect the parents. And so, it's like always, it's a very weird dynamic when you like have a lot of respect for somebody and then you see them doing something and you're like, oh.
Didn't love that.
Yeah. So, there's all these weird family dynamics that I'm sure every family goes through.
That's true.
Yeah. So back to Mildred and Colette. It seemed to have been said a lot that Mildred liked to live above her means.
Okay.
And like was like,
I get that.
Quite snobby.
Oh.
No, I know about living above our means. Like definitely feel that. But like
yourself.
Yeah, there were a lot of people, and it's hard because it's a lot of two people on opposite sides, but a lot of people who had like some pretty nasty things to say about Mildred.
Wow, okay.
Which is hard too, because like, as I said, like
she's been through some shit.
She's been through some shit.
Yeah.
This woman.
Sorry, she's not perfect.
Yeah, but there were a lot of people who like said that she was like very like money hungry and like that she would like buy the nicest things for herself, but then like when it came to buying things for her granddaughters, it was like always from a yard sale and blah blah blah. Again, this is all speculation and people just seeing things.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of people who thought that the Kassabs couldn't really afford their own lifestyle, and that Freddie just like let Mildred do whatever she wanted and like did whatever she said, and
yeah, it's just enabling
and
her.
Just like let her run things. And I got the impression, based on a lot of like letters and stuff that Colette had written to her mom and the way that she lived her life, that Colette was much more pragmatic. And it kind of led them to butt heads, especially because Mildred really had ideas for like what she wanted for Colette for her life. And it came from a place of caring, but like she definitely was like really happy that you'll find out later that Jeffrey was a doctor and that he was like going to medical school. And like it just seemed that like she almost like put Jeffrey like above Colette in a way.
Oh, that's not good.
And again, my own opinion and speculation based off of my extensive reading.
Yeah. You can have an opinion. You've read.
Yeah. I feel like I can have an opinion. Just I won't be able to know that it's an opinion. It's not fact.
Right.
And I might even go as far to say that Mildred pushed Colette to put up with things in her relationship with Jeffrey that maybe she otherwise wouldn't have.
Interesting.
Yeah, and just take that with a grain of salt, and like maybe I'm totally wrong, but I think that's the case.
Okay.
So Colette Stevenson and Jeffrey Macdonald met in the 8th grade. I forgot to look up how you pronounce this, but it's Patchagoo.
Okay.
Somebody is definitely not how you pronounce that.
It could be right. Yeah, no, I think that's right. Patchagoo. Patchagoo, maybe?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to say Patchagoo High School in Patchagoo.
We'll just say it really
Long
fast.
Island. Whoever,
Okay.
if anyone's from there, please tell us how to pronounce it nicely. So Jeffrey says that he was immediately interested in Colette the first time he ever saw her walking down the hallway.
In 8th grade.
In 8th grade.
Okay.
And it took him a bit of time and some asking around. And eventually, I think he had a class with her and like started talking to her. But he, got himself introduced to her. And they began dating in the 9th grade. And they were together for a while in high school. And during the last year of high school, Colette broke it off with Jeffrey to date another guy.
Aw.
I mean, it's high school. Like,
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Date the same person for the rest of your life? Aidan?
That was a dirty look.
Well, Aidan and Olivia have been together since high school,
Yeah.
so I'm throwing shade their way. Cool. It's really cool, though.
Super cool. No, it is.
That is cool.
It's actually pretty admirable. But anyway, it seemed like this was very crushing for Jeffrey.
Mhm.
I think most high school guys like take that kind of shit.
Do you think
badly.
he felt like it was like a shot at his male ego kind of thing? Or he was just like sad that...
I mean, I think that he had a pretty fragile male ego,
Yeah.
which we'll find out about later. So I wouldn't be shocked, but
That's why I asked, because I kind of know. I know a little bit about what goes down.
yeah. So in Fatal Vision, at the first like main book, it goes back and forth from Joe telling the story. Every other chapter is from Jeffrey, like it's just Jeffrey talking about like, so it starts talking about like the way that he met Colette and blah blah blah, and like about their relationship and
Okay.
everything. And so obviously it's all one-sided, and these are all based off of recordings that he made. I don't want to give it away, but while in prison.
Oh,
So it's like the way that he talks about things is very one-sided, and it's like through very rose-colored glasses, I'd say.
yeah.
So it's really difficult to say like what is the truth and what is him. Like it's all from him.
Yeah, and he's talking about it years later. So
So-
it's like when you were in 9th grade.
Exactly.
Or whatever.
I don't think he like definitely did say like I was very upset,
Yeah.
and
But I mean, I get it.
yeah, that's all I know about it. So Jeffrey says that he never really stopped loving her, although he did see other girls as well, and Jeffrey was quite the ladies' man.
Oh, you don't
As
say.
we will find out. Once they both started college, Colette was attending Skidmore College while Jeffrey was at Princeton.
Fancy.
He just decided to write Colette and ask her to consider seeing him again. And in his letter, he included some poetry.
Gotta love
Risky.
some poetry.
Yeah.
Do you have the poetry?
I don't have the poetry, but
Oh, no.
I do happen to have a friend who broke up with a guy, and he started sending her songs, and I listened to those, and like that's what I think of, and it's just all a lot.
It's usually a bad idea to send poetry if you're broken up.
Unless you're like actually good at poetry.
Yeah. But
if
you're
you just
not,
if you just
don't.
think you're good at poetry, I don't know. I don't think it was great.
Yeah.
I remember him talking about it and being like it was embarrassing.
Yeah,
but-
it sounds embarrassing.
It sounds like she took to it well because she
Okay.
agreed to see him again, and they remained together from that point on.
Nice.
So the summer of
For
1963.
now, it's nice.
Never like fall for the beginning of a true crime story. It always
Yeah,
sounds nice in the
yeah.
beginning, but never ends well. In the summer of 1963, the both of them were 20 years old, and Colette became pregnant. And this was quite a big deal. They were both very young. They were both still in school. Jeffrey was at Princeton, but he was getting ready to leave to go start medical school at Northwestern. He decided he wanted to be a doctor, so he was going to go be a doctor. When the couple told Mildred and Freddie, they were not happy. They were quite freaked out. Been there. And
Madison knows.
but the thing is, it was not because they were worried about Colette. They were mostly concerned that it would ruin Jeffrey's career path.
Right.
Because, as I said, they were, like, super invested in Jeff's career and,
Yep.
like, were very happy. And in a way, that is for Colette because, like, they're happy about Jeff's career because they're happy that he is going to provide for Colette. So, like, I don't think that's crazy. But it was actually Dorothy MacDonald, Jeffrey's mother, who came over and calmed them down. She was very matter-of-fact, and she told them, look, Jeffrey, whatever he decides he wants to do, he is successful at. And this is not going to be any different. He's going to become a doctor, and he's going to be a good father. And they were like, all right, fine. Okay. She's right, hopefully. And she was right. Jeffrey and Colette got married. Colette dropped out of school, and she went to live with Jeffrey while he continued schooling. Mm-hmm. They had their first baby, Kimberly, in April of 1964. 3 years later, the couple had a second daughter who they named Kristen. And now, obviously, this was a very tough time for the couple. Colette was a very young mother. She had very little help. Well, Jeffrey spent pretty much all of his time studying for school, finishing school, and then working his way through school. He had medical internships. He had odd jobs like driving taxis. And they both worked very hard and knew that what they were doing was a big investment for their future.
Right.
And that was like a kind of agreed upon situation where Colette dealt with everything at home and Jeff just worked his ass off, both at like odd jobs to make money at his internships and to finish school. And like, you know, being a doctor is like a lot. It's like medical school is like no joke. Sorry. I feel like I'm not breathing out, you know. So the family moved a few times for Jeffrey to do different internships in different places. I know they were living in Chicago at one point, and like they were living in like not nice places and bad neighborhoods. They had no money at the time, and they had 2 little kids. They stayed in very basic apartments, but they just made it work. And everything centered around Jeffrey's school and work, which made sense, but also meant that Colette was alone with the girls a lot. And by all accounts, Colette accepted this and she took it in stride. But, you know, personally, I have 2 young kids and I get a lot of help from my family. And I just know that this would have been an extremely challenging situation.
For sure.
And not something that, like, is unheard of or undoable, but, like...
But it's extreme. Like, it's so much work. It's so much emotional work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, I had my first kid at 24 and she had her first kid at 20. And 20 is young.
Yeah.
And I know, like, maybe... like in times before, like, and now it's like, now 24 is young, but like compared to historically it's not that young or whatever, but it's still young. And Colette seemed like a very like sheltered person who, like, you know, okay, so Jeffrey in his chapters where he talks a lot about like their like sexual history, and like he really talks a lot. And I don't know how much is Joe picking and choosing things.
Interesting.
But it's like a lot about like the first time that they had sex together and like the sex that he had with his other girlfriend, and but like it just he talks a lot about like their sexual history, and he talks a lot about how Colette was like a very like shy, delicate person. Like she was not, like, I'm sure for her it was like extremely accidental to get pregnant, and not something that anyone would have expected of her to get pregnant right away, like before she was married and blah, blah, blah. Like, so I'm sure that was like a really, really big deal for her.
I'm sure it would be.
Yeah.
So she's by herself pretty much with the kids. He's at school, at work, internships.
Yeah, doing a lot. So Jeffrey finished his final internship in June of 1969, and he enrolled in the Army on July 1st, 1969. In September of that year, after finishing a physician's basic training course in Texas and parachute training in Georgia, he was assigned to duty as a medical officer in the Green Beret headquarters in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Now, I don't believe that the Army was originally what Colette had in mind for Jeffrey, and I don't believe she was really given much of a say in this.
Okay.
Jeffrey signed up because they were in the middle of the Vietnam War, and he claims that he really felt a sense of duty, which I'm sure was something that a lot of the men at the time, like that's a very common mindset at that time. But Both Colette and Jeffrey were aware that joining the army would mean a lot more travel for Jeffrey and a lot less time with his family. Now, for anybody who isn't aware, the Green Berets are the United States Army Special Forces are the Green Berets, and they're called the Green Berets because of like a very distinctive headwear.
Is it a green beret by any chance?
It is literally a green beret.
Okay.
They are special forces of the United States Army that are designed to deploy and execute 9 doctrinal missions, which are unconventional warfare, foreign internal defense, direct action, counterinsurgency, special reconnaissance, counterterrorism, information operations, counter proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and security force assistance.
Sounds legit.
Which sounds super legit. It's like a pretty prestigious area of the military.
Okay.
I think it's like a pretty hard to get into thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, people who know what they're talking about, but that's my understanding. And shortly after being stationed in Fort Bragg, Colette and the kids joined him there. I guess they were, I don't remember where exactly they were, but he was doing his training or whatever. And they took up residence at a garden apartment at 544 Castle Drive.
Okay.
And the apartment was located at the end of a row of apartments. It was like kind of like a stacked townhouse situation where like there was like maybe 2 floors and there was one on top of the other kind of thing.
Yep.
And it was at the end of a row of apartments in a married officers' housing area called Corregidor Courts. So that Christmas, the MacDonalds announced that Colette was pregnant and they would be expecting a boy in July.
Okay.
So they're moved in. Jeffrey has his new Green Beret job, and things are looking up for them. It was, I believe, that Christmas that Jeffrey had just surprised the girls with a little pony. I know that...
A real pony?
Yeah, a real pony.
Oh, jealous.
And he did it in a really cute way where, like, it was Christmas morning and he was like, oh, there was one present that, like, I didn't get to. We have to go drive to pick it up, and, like, got everyone in the car and then, like, started driving off the road. And Colette's like, where are you going? And he's like, oh, just over here. I want to show you guys something. And, like, he got them out and there was a freaking pony for them.
That's
and, like,
amazing.
It was super cute.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And I know that him and Colette had a dream of, like, owning a big property with horses and having more children. And, like, that was what they wanted to do with their future. Or at least said so. Yeah. And so that was, like, the start of that goal, like, finally coming true. He was finally out of school. He was finally, like, settling into a really big job. And I know he's working at different hospitals. And he was doing very well in his career. And, you know, it was just at the point where their life was, like, starting to really turn up for them and get better.
We know what's coming.
And so now I'm going to get to what happened. So on the rainy early morning hours of February 17th, 1970, at 3:40 a.m., the telephone operator got a call requesting the military police and an ambulance to 544 Castle Drive.
Dear God.
The caller's voice was very faint and did not respond to further questions from the officer. The call was being patched through to the military police headquarters, where a desk sergeant was able to hear a faint voice of Jeffrey Macdonald say, quote, 544 Castle Drive, help. 544 Castle Drive, stabbing. End quote.
Oh, God.
Then what sounded like the phone falling on the floor. And for about 30 seconds, there was silence. And then, quote, 544 Castle Drive, stabbing, hurry, end quote. And then more silence. Within 10 minutes, a dozen military men made it to the scene. The front door was locked and there was no answer. One of them went around to check out the back of the house and immediately called the rest of the men. They entered through the unlocked back door to find Jeffrey and Colette MacDonald on the floor, covered in blood, and immediately they called for an ambulance. Colette was 26 at the time. She was found on her back with her legs apart on the floor next to the bed in the master bedroom. One of her eyes was open and one of her breasts was exposed. She was covered in blood and covered with a torn blue pajama top, which had been draped across part of her chest. Her face and head appeared to be battered and covered in blood. And the carpet beneath her was also soaked in a lot of blood.
That is so scary.
And scarier, the word pig had been written in blood on the headboard.
Oh, shout out the Manson family.
Very a la Manson murders. Captain Jeffrey Macdonald MD was found lying with Colette wearing only blue pajama bottoms. He was face down with his head in her chest, and his arm was around her neck as if he had been crying on her shoulder. And after only a few brief moments, Jeffrey whispered, "Check my kids." And when he did, they realized that he was alive. It was only then that they realized they thought he was dead. And they immediately began to give him CPR. So once he said, check my kids, they found the two daughters who were both found dead in their beds. And this is very gruesome.
So
people who don't like this kind of stuff, maybe tune out for a little bit.
But also, why are you listening to this if you don't like this kind of stuff?
Yeah, exactly. So Kimberly, age 5, was found laying on her left side, covers pulled up to her shoulders and tucked underneath her. She had a large wound on her cheek that was so deep that her bone was protruding.
So scary.
There was also a bunch of stab wounds on her neck. Kristen, age 2, was found in her bed, also on her left side, with her left arm outstretched and an empty baby bottle near her mouth. Her face and head were unmarked, but she had clearly been stabbed many times in the chest and back, and there was so much blood that it had gathered and dripped off the bed into a puddle on the floor.
Ugh.
Back in the master bedroom, Jeffrey kept talking. Quote, 4 of them. She kept saying, "Acid is groovy. Kill the pigs. Why did they do this to me? I can't breathe. I need a chest tube." End quote. He seemed to be going in and out of consciousness, and at one point he required mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And once he'd gathered consciousness a little, he shouted, "I've got to check my kids." At this point, they knew that his whole family was dead, so they really concentrated on trying to calm him down so that they could get him into the ambulance. And he was clearly in shock, and he was all over the place. They didn't give him any more details, but he continued to talk about the people that he claimed had attacked him. So he, at the time, mentioned 4 people.
Right.
2 white men, 1 black man, and a white woman with a large floppy hat, tall boots, and a candle.
A candle?
A candle.
Like a old-timey
Like a
candle?
just a lit single candle.
Sure. Wait, he was 26 too, right? At the time?
Was.
Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't
they were
realize
the same age.
younger than us.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I know. I just feel like my current age is so old. It's 27. And in our 28th year. Are we in our 28th year?
I'm 28.
You're 28. Oh
Yeah.
my God. Oh God.
I think it seems young.
I know. I know. Anyway. So at certain points, from the house to the hospital and the ambulance, he claimed that there were 2 black men and 1 white, and he was also suffering from a number of physical injuries himself and was clearly under extreme emotional stress. So.
But he wasn't dead. The rest of them are dead.
Yes.
And he's not as badly stabbed, I'm assuming.
No, and his injuries are nowhere near their injuries.
And they died from stabbings. It wasn't like they were, right? Like they weren't like murdered and then stabbed. They died from their stabbings.
That's correct. And we'll get to like all the exact injuries. But yeah, he clearly had way fewer injuries. And I think the thing is, what Joe is trying to get across is like how erratic he was and all the things he was saying that didn't really match up. But I think at this point, if you're going to take everything at face value and you're going to like, roll with him on the fact that somebody else did this, like if we're going on that, then like no shit, he's saying random shit. Like if you were just attacked by a bunch of people and saw your entire family be murdered, like you're going to just be like,
you're going to say dumb shit.
You're just going to say whatever the hell and not even know what you're saying. So, like, I'm trying to say, like, I don't think that's crazy.
I don't think so
if that was the case. So, Jeffrey had 1 large stab wound on his chest, and it had punctured part of his lung. That was his main injury, and, like, that's a pretty severe injury.
For sure.
It's not life-threatening if it's, like, attended to, but it's still severe. Like, you have trouble breathing if you've punctured a lung.
Sounds severe. Stabbing.
So we saw a number of doctors. The first doctor noted 3 main injuries. In addition to the chest lung puncture, he had a bruise on the left side of his forehead, superficial stab wounds of the abdomen and upper left arm, but nothing that required stitching. So, like, not crazy.
Yeah. Sounds way less severe.
So, yeah, absolutely. A second doctor to see MacDonald was a surgical resident, Benjamin Klein. He noticed all the same things as the previous doctor, but also noticed 4 puncture-type wounds along a linear track spaced evenly about 2 to 3 millimeters apart, something that would be comparable to fingernail marks.
Oh.
During MacDonald's time with Dr. Klein, MacDonald continued to ask about his family and talk about the intruders. He described all of his attackers and mentioned their weapons, a bat-like object, a knife-like instrument, and an ice pick.
Oh, the ice pick.
He mentioned that he had checked on all of his family members' pulses and could not find any. He also mentioned that he had pulled a knife out of Colette's chest, and he wanted the doctor to let the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, the CID, know that he had done this.
Okay.
The third doctor to see Jeffrey was an ex-coworker of his, Dr. Merrill Bronstein, and he was a staff surgeon on call in the morning, and he had worked with Jeffrey in the emergency room of a civilian hospital in Fayetteville. Bronstein spoke very highly of Jeffrey, and he was very impressed by MacDonald, both as a person and a physician, obviously before this incident.
Yeah.
Bronstein had described MacDonald as very tearful and upset. He described MacDonald as hysterical and in an extreme emotional state. Bronstein had him sedated and took a number of drugs to calm him down. During Jeffrey's time with Bronstein, he kept repeating things that he had been saying and asking Dr. Klein and asking about his family and why they weren't there with him and speaking about the attack. And it really seemed that Joe was trying to get it across that Bronstein was felt kind of weirded out by this and was really he really was uncomfortable with how emotional Jeffrey was being.
Interesting.
Which I don't think that that's weird that he was being really emotional.
I mean,
but
yeah, his family just died.
Yeah, but he was really getting across how hysterical Jeffrey was being, and it took a lot of drugs to just
because it was out of character for him, or just.
I think that's part of why it was weird for him, and I don't necessarily think it was out of character for a person like Jeffrey who would experience something like this.
Yeah.
But out of character because he'd obviously never seen him experience something like this. You know what I mean? So Dr. Bronstein, at Jeffrey's request, was the person to notify Colette's family that something had happened to them and that they better get over here. He didn't say that they're dead, but he was
I would not want to be the one to make that call.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, no thank you.
Well, and I think that's why he didn't say this is what happened. He said something really terrible happened. You have to come here right now. Which, oh my God, how horrible. So very soon after the murders, descriptions were made about the intruders and a massive search began. And everyone thought that the assailants would be located quickly, but they were never found. So to put this whole situation in context, the Manson murders, as we know, had just occurred. Everyone was aware of the details at this point.
Wait, it had just occurred. July 1969 and August 7th, 1969.
Exactly.
I think that's right.
And this was February of 1970.
Okay, yeah, pretty soon
So
after.
it was less than a year. Much less than a year. But yeah, so everyone was aware of the details, and it seemed that this was obviously very eerily similar, especially with the pig.
That's, who else does that?
And as I noted before, the Vietnam War was going on. Fayetteville itself was known to have a pretty big drug problem, allegedly mostly from soldiers smuggling heroin and stuff like that back from Vietnam.
Wow, okay.
And there was a lot of hippies in the area. So it was very end of the 60s era.
Yeah.
Pretty violent times. The county sheriff had been quoted as saying that in the last 6 months, there had been more heroin-related busts than in the last 15 years combined.
Whoa.
So there was quite an extreme drug problem.
And that'll fuck you up. Heroin's going to mess you up.
For sure.
I assume. Never done it. Don't
worry. Well, in all
You're
movies,
I have.
definitely have not. But it seems like the type of thing that, and it's interesting because in reading this book, there was somebody who was talking about, because there's always the theory that drugs made people do this, and he's it's not that drugs make people do this type of stuff. It's that people who are addicted to heroin need money and commit crimes for money to pay for the drugs.
It could be, but I'm not saying that I've ever done drugs. But if I had done drugs, I might have acted in ways that I wouldn't act when I wasn't on drugs.
Yeah, but if you've ever done drugs, I don't know if you ever have not, but have you ever felt the urge to be violent? allegedly?
No. Not violent, but just like impulsive.
Impulsive, but like I think it's like
you're saying that the statement is that drugs won't make you violent. It's you're already violent to get drugs.
It definitely depends on the drug, but like heroin specifically, to me, and I've never done it. I like legit have never done it. But
not like how I've never done drugs.
It seems like one of those drugs that you just like fade out on.
Yeah.
That the violence comes from...
You're not on PCP.
Yeah, it's like the violence comes from the need for money.
Okay. Not
from the drug itself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which, I mean, again, if like what's the difference if the crime is a crime? But there's that specification. And I think there is like a drug theory against Jeffrey that is controversial that we'll get to. I'm saying I'm going to get to a lot of things, and I will.
And we will.
I'm trying very hard because I know this is a very deep dive, and it's very like against my nature to like
not skip ahead.
To like not be like, oh my god, like try to like vomit out the entire thing very quickly. So I'm trying to like really go piece by piece.
Let's get all the details.
Exactly. I don't want to miss anything. Okay, so while Jeffrey remained at the hospital, the real investigation began at 544 Castle Drive. The first detective on the scene of the CID was Detective William Ivory. And remember, the CID is the Criminal Investigation Division of the Army. So remember, this happened to an Army person, or it happened within the Army. So this is all under the Army jurisdiction. So they have their own police, they have their own everything. So these are not the regular police. And I think it is my suspicion that the military police are probably a little less equipped to deal with this type of thing.
Yeah.
I think they definitely probably see stuff like this on a much smaller scale, and like the crimes seem to be much, or I would assume are a lot like less of this stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not like a homicide division of a police department.
Yeah, especially like a city police department. And I think you'll see why I think that. So William Ivory arrives and he starts going through the crime scene, and he began at Colette's body, and he noted a few things. The torn blue pajama top had been laid across her chest and a white Hilton Hotel bath mat on her abdomen. Later, when Ivory would remove the pajama top from Colette's body, he would note a large amount of puncture wounds in the top, presumably from the ice pick.
Oh, that's fucked.
The word pig was written in blood on the headboard. Mm-hmm. A small wooden-handled paring knife with a bent blade and a brand name of Geneva Forge stamped on the handle. By Colette's feet lay the pocket from the blue pajama top, and it was lightly flecked with blood. There was a large stain, presumably from urine, on the exposed bottom sheet of the bed. Crumpled up in the corner was a blood-soaked bedspread and a top sheet. Ivory then went into the bedrooms of Kim and Kristen.
This is a messy crime scene.
This is a horrific,
that's
just treacherous.
I would not want to walk into that room.
Yeah, and like people... Like for example, there was 2 photographers, like somebody came in to photograph and he got physically sick and had to leave. Yeah. And that's why they got a second one. Like it was horrific. By Colette's feet lay the pocket from the blue pajama top. It was lightly flecked with blood. Oh no, I said all that. So Ivory went into the bedrooms of Kim and Kristen. He looked over the bodies and their injuries and noted there was a big bloody footprint on the floor in Kristen's bedroom leading away from the bed. Ivory then went to the next door neighbors to ask if they had heard anything, and they claimed they hadn't.
Oh, that's surprising.
Yeah, suspicious.
You'd think they'd hear like screaming. Oh, I don't know where this is leading. Okay.
I'm trying not to get ahead of myself.
Yeah,
but take note. Shortly after 5 a.m., Fort Bragg's chief law enforcement officer, Franz Joseph Gerbner, arrived and received a briefing from Ivory. Gerbner had spent 19 years on the CID, and he had many crime scenes under his belt during his time there. He looked over the crime scene, and a few things stood out to him immediately. He felt that the crime scene showed way too few signs of disorder. Oh. And let's remember, he's now here like an hour after everything happened. Keep that in mind, too.
Like an hour after the murders.
Yeah, I think it was like 3:30 that the call came in. And
At
it's
night,
now
3:30
5 a.m.
a.m.?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's now 5 a.m. So we looked over the crime scene, and yeah, so it's too few signs of disorder. Considering the location in which a life and death struggle occurred between a Green Beret officer and allegedly 4 drug-induced intruders, the mess consisted of a tipped-over coffee table, its lower edge resting on a stack of magazines, an upright flower pot on the floor with the plant spilled out alongside it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's upright on the floor. Like, it looked like it had been spilt and put back.
Oh.
A pair of eyeglasses with a single speck of blood on the outer lens was in the corner of the room, and nothing at all appeared to be disturbed in the dining room. So there was like a living room, and next to it was a dining room, and there was like, it had been Valentine's Day recently. There was a bunch of like Valentine's Day cards which were like not disturbed, didn't fall over. The type of thing where like if you like blow too hard, they would fall over. So he found that to be very suspicious. At about 6 a.m., an hour later, the murder weapons were all found. A bloodstained club lay just outside the back door, and it measured 31 by 1/4 by 1/4 inches, and 2 blue threads were stuck to it with blood. About 20 feet away, near a bush, lay an ice pick and a second paring knife, and this knife had old hickory on the handle, and both blades appeared to have been wiped clean of blood.
Oh.
So the club had blood on it, and these had been wiped.
And yet it was left there, which is kind of weird, right?
Very.
It's not
like,
a thing.
you're wiping the blood but leaving them?
Yeah.
That's kind of weird.
That's super weird.
The final few notable things found by Ivory and Gribner
Wait,
were...
ice pick? No ice pick?
Yeah, 20 feet away lay the ice pick.
God.
And a second paring knife.
Okay.
So at this point, they had found 2 separate knives, an ice pick, and a club.
Yeah, that's a lot of fucking weapons.
Yeah, the other knife was inside. Remember, it was like pulled out of club.
Right, with a bent
And the
blade.
other 3 were in the backyard. So the other notable things were a large amount of blue threads that seemed to come from the blue pajama top underneath Colette's body.
That's what I would have thought.
3 pieces of a rubber surgical glove, 2 on the floor, and 1 in the bloody sheets in the bedroom.
What's that doing there?
Well, I believe that the thought is that that's what they used to write pig
Oh, okay.
on the wall. Okay, so here's the autopsy results.
Ugh, let's hear it.
Colette was stabbed 9 times in the neck. And, like, just look how long this is. That's a lot.
Long report.
Colette was stabbed 9 times in the neck with a knife. Stabbed 7 times in the chest with a knife. One of those stab wounds put a hole through her major pulmonary artery, the vessel that carries blood from the heart to the lungs. And this caused massive bleeding in her chest cavity and into the sac surrounding her heart. And this had been the cause of her death, both internal and external bleeding. She also had been stabbed 21 times in the chest with the ice pick.
That's so many stabs.
She'd been hit at least 6 times on the head with a club on her temples, in
Seems
the middle of her
unnecessary.
forehead. It's so excessive. On the top of her head, across her jaw, and some of these blows had caused lacerations so extreme that the skin had torn right down to the bone.
That's so sad.
So imagine... so I'll just finish it before I get into my little opinion about that. But both of Colette's arms had been broken. Both bones...
What the fuck?
Defensive. This is what I think they think it was. Both bones on her right arm and one of the bones in her left arm had been broken twice. The pathologist described these injuries as defensive. They were most likely sustained as she held her arms in defense of the club blows.
That's fucked.
And of course, as I mentioned, she was pregnant. So the male fetus of approximately 4 to 5 months gestation was removed from her womb. A blonde hair, approximately 6 inches long, was found stuck with blood to one of her palms. And a piece of what appeared to be human skin was removed from underneath one of her nails. That's pretty key, eh?
Wait, human skin was removed by the by the coroner or whatever.
Was found under her nail.
Oh, whose skin was it?
We'll get to that here.
Oh, I want to know whose skin it was.
So she was stabbed with a knife many times. She was stabbed with an ice pick many times. And she was clubbed many times.
That's a lot.
Yes.
That's like...
absolutely extreme. Because you have to imagine, the 2 theories are either
Did
3
Jeffrey
people,
do it, or did...
either like 3 people with a separate weapon,
Yeah.
each got a hand, or one person took a knife, stabbed her a bunch of times, dropped it. took an ice pick, and I don't know in what order.
Right.
Stabbed her a bunch of times, dropped it, and then picked up a club and beat her. And like maybe insane. In different areas of the house or whatever, but both of those things seem crazy to me.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Okay, and now we're getting to the autopsies of the girls.
Okay.
Kimberly's death had been caused by at least 2 hits to the head with a club. The blows had shattered her skull and caused massive bruising of her brain.
Aww.
The blows were so severe as to cause coma or death almost immediately.
Well, that's small positive, I guess.
After her death, Kimberly was stabbed with a knife on the right side of her neck. The neck stabs went through her windpipe, and some of them came out the other side. It was impossible to tell how many there were because of how they overlapped, but their best approximation was about 8 to 10.
Still way too many.
Excessive.
Yeah.
Hit once on the left side of her face with the club, the blow had delivered such a force that it caused multiple fractures of the cheekbone and nose and left a piece of the cheekbone poking through the skin, as I said before. Kristen, who was age 2 and found in her crib next to her bottle, there were 33 separate incisions found in Kristen's body. She was stabbed 12 times in the back, 4 times in the chest, and once in the neck, all with a knife. 2 knife wounds were deep enough to penetrate her heart. She was also found to have approximately 15 shallow puncture wounds caused by an ice pick. Minimal force was used. So that is really interesting to me because it seems like the knife wounds were extremely aggressive, going right through, and the ice pick wounds were like very minimal.
Yeah. And on the others, those were still way more intense.
She also had a number of defensive wounds on her hands, and it was likely that she was holding her hands in front of her while she was being attacked.
So sad.
A blue thread was found beneath one of her fingernails.
Okay.
So that's the... And that's like... I think that's mostly like the bulk of the like horrificness of this.
So Madison, generally speaking, when murders happen and they're that aggressive, that's usually something like...
personal.
Yeah. But in the Manson family murders, they did a lot of that stuff too, right?
Well, that's the thing. It's like, that's the type of thing that I think tends to be indicative of when somebody is really, really angry with somebody.
It's like a revenge type of situation.
Yes. But it's also like, it's so hard because like, it did happen right at the time of the Manson murders. And like, that's what they did. And that was like a drug-induced cult thing, and like that is a way that drugs can, I think, induce people to violent activities. But like for that specific case, it was like they were doing LSD constantly all the time while being literally brainwashed by somebody, and then he told me, like it's not that they like took LSD one time and like they got violent, but it's definitely in like it could go both ways.
I know. Other than the Manson family case, like any type of situation I've ever heard of that involves that much excessiveness is usually a personal thing. That being said, fucking Jeffrey, are you stabbing your child this many times and your wife? Like,
well, yeah. So that's the thing. I think the going theory would be that it was out of rage at Colette, and then like one of the daughters saw, and
that's
so he had to
a lot
kill
of fucking
her,
rage,
and blah blah blah. But the like, and to make it seem like they were all killed by the same person, maybe he had to do it to them,
right?
And,
like not to get ahead of ourselves of did he do it or did he not do it, but potentially it was like a cover up type scenario.
Exactly. The theory,
which is insane.
The theory would have been that like he fought with Colette over whatever, and ended up injuring her and or killing her. And then
way fucking overcompensating.
But then, and we will get into it later.
Yeah, I want to know more about their relationship. Like,
I'm intrigued. I got you there. Okay, so I'll keep going, and we'll all soak that in and get to it. Okay. At the hospital during the morning and the afternoon, Jeffrey was interviewed by both the CID and the FBI.
Yeah, as he should be.
Of course. A CID agent had taken note that Jeffrey seemed to display surprisingly little emotion, which is super weird because everyone else said he was extremely emotional.
Yeah.
So I think this probably was after he had all those drugs to
sedate he was sedated,
him. Yeah. So, let's be mindful when like reading too much into somebody saying he's emotional or not emotional. But he said he described so little emotion. He was able to talk about Kimberly and Colette a little bit, but it was too difficult for him to talk about Kristen. Like, that's when he says he wouldn't talk about Kristen, it's because it was like too difficult for him to talk about it.
So in a way, that is probably him feeling emotional, but just trying to like hold it together.
And the question is, was he feeling remorseful or was he feeling sad?
God.
So Jeffrey recounted the evening. His official account of the actual event went like this.
Okay.
Colette had come home. She was taking a night psychology class. So she had come home. And I think there was one interview about this where he says he was babysitting his kids, which is always a very funny way for a father to say that he was taking care of his children, that he was babysitting.
Kind of shows that maybe
says a lot about
deadbeat.
Yeah. Well, yeah, not a deadbeat, but I don't think he was a deadbeat, but he was like not
doing shit with his kids.
He was the type of
he got them a pony, so
he was just always working. Like he was like a man dad who didn't. Who said he was babysitting his kids.
Go hunt.
Exactly. So she came home from her psychology class. The girls were already in bed. Colette and Jeff had a drink together and they watched a bit of TV. Colette eventually went to bed, but Jeff had stayed up for a while to finish the show that he was watching, and then he wanted to finish a novel that he was reading. He washed the dishes that were in the sink, and then he went to bed. Now, when he got to his bed, he found Kristen, the 2-year-old, asleep next to Colette, which was something that happened a lot. And he noticed that she had wet the bed.
Okay.
So instead of disturbing Colette from her sleep, he gave Kristen a bottle and put her back in her own bed, and then he went to sleep on the couch. Basically, like, he didn't want to, like, take off the... Like, he would have had to wake up Colette to take off the sheet, blah, blah, blah. The next thing he remembers is being woken up by Colette screaming, quote, "Jeff, help, help, Jeff, what are they doing to me?" End quote. And at the same time, he heard his oldest daughter screaming, quote, "Daddy, daddy, daddy." Now I have here to read on page 44. Is it 46? So this is a quote directly from Fatal Vision of him describing what happened. Quote, "As he opened his eyes, he saw 4 people standing over him. A black man wearing an army fatigue jacket with sergeant stripes on the sleeve. 2 white men, one of whom had a mustache and wore a red hooded sweatshirt, and a blonde woman in a floppy hat holding a candle in front of her face. She wore high boots and a short skirt. He could not recall the exact color of the boots, but said that they were so wet they appeared to be black. Quote, "They were all wet," he said. The water was just dripping off them like they had just been walking in the rain. "Acid is groovy," the woman was chanting. "Kill the pigs. Acid and rain." As he tried to sit up, the black man hit him on the side of the head with a baseball bat. As he grabbed for it, he found it to be slippery as if it were covered in blood. Struggling with the intruders, MacDonald had suddenly felt a sharp pain in the right side of his chest. At first he thought, "This guy throws a hell of a punch." Then he looked down and saw the glint of a blade and an ice pick. He wrestled his way off the end of the couch and toward the 2 steps that led from the living room to the hallway. At this point, he fell forward and passed out. When he regained consciousness, he did not know how much time had passed. The house was silent and the dark was shivering, and he shivering so hard that his teeth were chattering. His pajama top, bloody and torn, was twisted around his wrists. And then he went room to room, noticed everyone, tried to give them CPR, and then eventually called for help.
That's scary.
If that is what actually happened, it's horrifying.
Yeah.
Absolutely horrifying. So the Fort Gordon laboratory team spent 4 days inside 544 Castle Drive collecting evidence, and here were some of their findings.
Let's hear it.
81 blue threads were found in the master bedroom, 19 blue threads in Kimberly's room, most in the covers that she'd been tucked in. So she had been stabbed and then tucked.
Yeah, weird.
And so that, I think, makes sense of, like, it makes sense in a lot of ways, because if, like, Jeffrey had literally killed her, that shows remorse. If he had, like, gone to see her and see if she was okay and figured out that she was dead and covered her up, that makes sense too.
Right. Oh, so we're assuming that it was Jeffrey who covered her up, not the perpetrator.
And I think that would make sense with his story or without.
Okay.
2 blue threads in Kristen's bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
0 blue threads found in the living room where Jeffrey had claimed the blue pajama top had been torn. They also found multiple blood-stained splinters in all the rooms, again except the living room, which seemed to have been broken off from the club. They were found in Kristen's room even though she wasn't hit with the club. There was lots of blood in all the rooms, splatters and blood-stained indentations on the ceiling, indicating that the blood-soaked club had been swung up high, hitting the ceiling before bludgeoning the victims.
Oh, it's very Dexter. Blood spatter analysis.
Yeah, well, that comes from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
There was a trail of blood leading from Kimberly's room to the master bedroom, and then, of course, there's the bloody footprint in Kristen's room. Blood was also found on the door of the hall closet, and this hall closet contained a lot of medical supplies. A lot. And Jeffrey is a doctor, so, like, that's not crazy, but it was a lot of medical supplies, including drugs, syringes, hypodermic needles, and even scalpel blades.
Oh.
There were several drops of blood on the right side of the sink in the bathroom. There were several drops of blood that had dripped onto the kitchen floor beneath the sink in front of the cabinet, which contained latex gloves all the way in the back that were identical to the pieces of the latex glove found on the bed. There were some places where investigators found no blood or fingerprints, which included on either of the 2 phones that Jeffrey had used to call 911. No blood had been found in the hallway, the place that Jeffrey had claimed to have lain unconscious after he'd been stabbed in the chest.
Oh.
The living room
This is suspicious.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, what the hell? Okay.
The living room also had almost no blood, the only 2 exceptions being a single speck of blood on a pair of eyeglasses and a smear of blood across the cover of the Esquire magazine that we'll hear about in a little bit.
Okay.
They found the word pig had been written in blood by a right-handed man who had used 2 separate dips to finish and wore something over his hand.
How do they know it was a man? Just like the size of the hand?
I think that they may be speculating that.
Okay.
I don't know how they knew it was a man. I think they might have just said man because, like, it was the 70s and, like, they just assumed
that's just like the gender neutral term back then.
Yeah, exactly. Probably person is more accurate.
Okay.
So the neighbors, who I mentioned before,
what is up with them?
They were revisited, and they lived beside but also on top of the MacDonalds, just the way the layouts of the apartments were. I believe it was like kind of an L shape. Yep. So the mother and daughter both changed their stories and said that they had heard things that night.
What?
Yeah. I don't know why they lied about it at first. Yeah. It's really unclear. The mother said that at some time during the night, she had been awakened by the sound of Colette screaming, and she sounded angry. The daughter claimed that she heard a voice who she knew to be Jeffrey Macdonald, either sobbing loudly or laughing hysterically.
What the fuck?
Which one?
Oh, so creepy. Either way is, like, kind of bad, right? I guess the sobbing
would be an indication. Sobbing, I think, could be an indication that he was remorseful about what he did, or that, like, he's seeing things happen and, like, getting emotional. Yeah. Laughing hysterically.
That's weird.
That would be weird.
Yeah.
On February 19th, there was a press conference. Feeling major pressure from the media, the Army decided to hold a press conference. It was hosted by Lieutenant Ron Harrison, who had been a close friend of the MacDonalds and a fellow Green Beret. He also happened to be the last person to see them all together as a family. He described Jeffrey as one of the greatest guys he had worked with. He was a great doctor, very caring and hardworking. He described how much he loved and cared for his family. He described the last time that he'd been over at 544 Castle Drive. It was Valentine's Day evening, and he described it as super normal, just hanging out with food and drinks. But he did note one thing that seemed rather odd in retrospect.
Oh, what was it?
Harrison described a new issue of Esquire magazine that Jeffrey had received in the mail. Mm-hmm. On the cover, there was a picture of Lee Marvin with a big caption reading, "Evil lurks in California. Lee Marvin is afraid." The entire issue focused on witchcraft and satanic cults and violence in California. MacDonald specifically pointed out an article about an acid queen, in quotes, with long blonde hair among a posse of 4 who had consummated a candlelit acid-induced orgy by having sex with a black swan.
Oh, how? But okay.
very weird, but
it's the
what we're
4.
looking at here is Acid Queen, long blonde hair,
Yep.
and amidst a posse of 4. And having
as in, like, that's where he got the idea to say
that's
what happened?
That is what Joe McGinnis is very obviously getting at. Another article focused on the death of Sharon Tate and the Manson murders, and in the article it mentioned that Sharon was killed while pregnant and had the word pig had been written in blood in the crime scene.
Yeah, big time parallels.
So that was weird.
Super fucking weird.
So then a little bit after that, the lab results of all the forensics had come in. The crime scene had been thoroughly searched, and they filed a lot of evidence, which in their opinion pointed toward Jeffrey. And the results, but the results were very disappointing because there had been a lot of fuck-ups. A lot.
Oh, no.
So McDonald's pajama bottoms had been thrown away at the hospital and burned with the rest of the hospital trash.
What the hell?
Oh my God. Just you wait. The McDonald's garbage had been collected by the Fort Bragg garbage men instead of being saved by the CID on the morning of the crime.
Why wouldn't they save it?
The crucial piece that they would have been looking for were the rubber gloves. They found pieces, but not the whole thing.
Right.
Used to smear the word pig.
Mm-hmm.
They realized the gloves could have easily been flushed down the toilet. But they didn't think about this until 4 days after constant use of their bathrooms by everybody on the scene.
Why are they using their bathrooms? It's a crime scene.
Bro, they fucked the crime scene up.
Yeah.
Really hard.
That's like, I've never been to a crime scene, hope to never go to one or be involved in one. But, like, that's basic fucking knowledge. Leave it as it is.
They destroyed this crime scene.
Wow.
While removing the piece of floor that had the bloody footprint, the technician accidentally broke the entire section of the floor, destroying the evidence completely.
Oh my God, such a fuck up.
The piece of skin found beneath Colette's nail, lost entirely.
They lost that piece of skin?
Whoops, gone.
That's so important.
That's literally whoever skin that was the killer.
Yeah. Wow.
Here's what they did find that pointed toward Jeffrey, in their opinion.
All right, let's hear it.
The blue threads came from Jeffrey's pajama top. No surprise there.
Right.
Also could have easily been left while he was checking on all of the victims.
Yeah.
The rubber glove fragments were identical to the ones found under the sink.
Mm-hmm.
So either extreme coincidence that somebody brought their own or they got them from there. And how did they know they were there? The rubber gloves were also like really far back.
Yeah.
They were not in an obvious spot.
That is weird.
The blonde hair found on Colette's palm had been her own.
Oh, shit.
No prints were found on any 4 of the murder weapons. Paint stains were found.
No prints on the murder weapons.
None. They'd all been wiped.
Mm.
Paint stains were found on the club that were identical to the paint on a homemade bookshelf found in one of the girls' rooms, indicating that the club had come from the home. It seemed plausible that it came from a big pile of old wood in their backyard.
Oh.
Which, again,
anyone could have taken that, I guess.
Exactly. It's none of it is like
super conclusive. Yeah.
Exactly.
That piece of skin would have been good to have.
So the blood analysis was some of the most interesting. What really worked in their favor in a way, and this was like super rare and crazy that this happened, but each family member had a different blood type.
Okay.
So this was not at a time, like, forensics were nowhere near where they are today. This was like 50 years ago.
I mean, clearly it's not.
So they didn't.
Quite efficient.
Exactly. So they didn't have a way to like identify all their blood, but because they were all different blood types, they were able to determine whose blood was whose. Okay. And now, mind you, if somebody else had been in there who had like also gotten injured, usually perpetrators in this type of situation would also leave blood. So like if there was a perpetrator whose blood was mixed in and who happened to be in the same blood type as one of these people, it would be mistaken. And under what I'm about to talk about, it would have been mistaken for one of the family members' blood.
Got it.
So just keep that in mind.
Can I just say, like, if it was Jeffrey, the like defensive wounds with Colette, like, that's insane.
I can't. And knowing she was pregnant.
Yeah.
With his only son.
What the fuck?
Yeah. It's and on fucking Kristen, the 2-year-old.
Yeah.
Defensive wounds.
Yeah. Like, that's crazy.
So based on the okay, so this meant they could determine whose blood was whose in every location of the house. And the blood evidence, Ivory and Gerbner began to feel that it really contradicted Jeffrey's story.
Oh.
For one, they found large amounts of blood matching Jeff, Colette, and Kimberly in the master bedroom. This was weird because Jeff never mentioned Kimberly in their bedroom. In Kimberly's room, they found blood matching everybody except Jeff. Kristen's room had a mix of all 4 blood types. A lot of the blood could be explained by the killer or killers moving around and tracking blood, but the volume of Colette's blood in both Kristen's bedroom and the master bedroom had led investigators to believe that she was actively bleeding in both of those locations.
Weird.
The biggest thing from the blood analysis was that the blood drops outside of the kitchen cabinet containing the rubber gloves had belonged to Jeffrey, and some of the blood drops on the bathroom sink also belonged to Jeffrey. The detectives theorized that these blood droplets could have been made while he was stabbing himself.
I mean, if it was him, he fucking stabbed himself, which would be a lot.
That's not necessarily true. He could have gotten in a fight with Colette, and she defended herself by attacking him with an item.
Yeah.
Gerbner and Ivory were convinced that they had their guy, but unfortunately, all of the evidence was circumstantial. A full 6 weeks went by before they did anything with the information. With pressure mounting from the higher-ups every day.
What was Jeffrey doing?
He was,
hanging out?
Yeah, he was hanging out. He was, mourning, and he was in the hospital for a little bit. Right. There was a funeral, and he went on a trip with his mother. I think he went out to California just to, try to
just get away from it all,
deal with everything. And I think it was her who convinced him to go out, and he talks about that a lot in his chapters where he recorded stuff. And he's he really did not talk a lot to his family about what actually happened, and I think most of them were kind of scared to ask him.
I mean, yeah, it's so fresh too, right?
Exactly.
But
his story of the events was taken as true. Everybody was oh, true. If he said that happened, his family and everyone.
Also, I'm just remembering how his brother turned crazy and had a schizophrenic attack. So
at the exact same time. So his poor mother is trying to go with him on vacation. And not vacation. It's hard to call that a vacation, but was taking him to be near the ocean to try to relax, while also trying to deal with the other brother's major issues.
Weird. Okay.
So Gerbner and Ivory finally decided to sit down with MacDonald's and present him with the circumstantial evidence and hope that he would confess. Now, one of the main pieces of evidence, or one of the main reasons that they first were drawn to the idea that it was a staged crime scene, had to do with the coffee table. The coffee table was found tipped over on its side. Now, this was a very top-heavy coffee table.
It would have been hard to tip over or easy to tip over?
It's that they found that if you were to push it, no matter how you push it over, it always would end up flipped completely 180 degrees with the legs up. So the fact that it was resting on its side, they believe they were
it was intentionally placed on its side.
They believed that it was placed on the side because they could not figure out a way, and they tried many, many times. They could not figure out a way.
You're putting a lot of effort into this when you could have been maintaining the integrity of the crime scene.
Now, the crime scene, the crime scene was so fucked up.
Yeah.
There was 27 people who had trampled through. It was a rainy day, so there was mud and crap everywhere, and there was no way to identify who it was from, if it was from the killers or it was from the officers.
That's a bad way to deal with crime
They
scene.
were using the bathroom. They were touching things. People were picking up the phone, using it, the phone that he had made calls from. They were sitting on the couch. It was an absolute mess, which we will find out during one of the trials.
Right.
Okay, so this was their first. So this was Ivory and Gerbner's first main interrogation with Jeffrey that happened 6 weeks later. So he'd been lightly talked to at the hospital. But after that point, I think that they knew that once they started talking to him and accusing him of things, they only really had the second you start asking somebody about that, you risk them shutting down and lawyering up. So they really wanted to get their ducks in a row before they started talking to him. So that's why I think there was that 6 weeks. So it was Monday, April 6th, when Jeffrey was summoned to the headquarters of the Fort Bragg Criminal Investigation Division to meet with Ivory and Gerbner. It was a long interrogation, and I'd say that it did not go well for either party. The detectives laid out all the evidence that they had, the blood analysis, their thoughts on the crime scene, how they thought it had been staged, and the coffee table and everything. And they focused heavily on this plant pot, which remained upright while the contents had been knocked over.
Yeah, weird.
And there was very little blood in the living room when Jeffrey claimed he'd been attacked. No blood or fingerprints on the phones, etc., etc. All things that I mentioned. Jeffrey did not confess. He tried to come up with reasons why these things were the way they were, and he made the very valid point that he told his story the way that he really thinks it happened, but it was a complete frenzy, and he'd been woken up in the middle of a deep sleep. It's very probable that he did not remember things exactly as they happened.
For sure.
And I think that is something that gets very overlooked at this case.
Yeah.
Because when it comes down to always is like, the end of the day, the people who are like, he did it, it comes down to that the forensics don't match Jeffrey's story.
Right.
But it's like, it's all been based on this story that he talked about right after it happened. And like, so this is something that I was talking to Aidan about a while ago. Like, so this is my second time being in Aidan's house ever, his condo, where he's just moved into. The last time we came here, we did a podcast. I sat on this couch right here. There is a giant TV right here. We came over to Aidan's house, and then like the next week we were at my family's house, and we were talking about the podcast and how like it would be a good idea if we could like figure out putting all of our like visuals up on the TV so that we could reference it or whatever. And I was like, oh, you have a TV? And he's like, you literally sat across from it for like 4 hours. Yeah. It was right in front of your face. I don't know. I was sitting here. Nothing crazy is happening, and I didn't remember something that was staring me directly in the face.
Yeah.
People's memories are so... I think it's completely likely that Jeffrey Jeffrey gave his statement of events, and if we're taking it in, or if we're deciding to believe him in this hypothetical, it's entirely likely that whatever happened, and he told what he thought had happened, but it was just completely incorrect.
Yeah.
Because people recall things in a like really badly,
especially when you're in shock, especially when it's the middle of the night, sure.
When you're woken up from a deep sleep. And
yeah.
It's because the mind fills in blanks when it doesn't remember what happened, when it's either trying to protect you from what happened and it was terrible, or just you don't remember, or you were groggy or whatever. There is no way
like it's a traumatic event, so he's probably not in the best state of mind to recall events.
Even if an event is not traumatic, if you're not specifically looking out for things, you're not going to remember them properly. So that's just something that like always sticks with me with this case, because it seems to always come back to the forensic evidence don't match Jeffrey's story.
Yeah.
And I don't even know that Jeffrey knows that his story is correct. Even if we're taking it as a hypothetical that his story is what happened, I don't think there's even any way for him to know whether the details that he's saying happened, and that's just the way the human mind works.
Yeah, it's kind of like, if we're gonna be on Jeffrey's side, it's possible that he just said it wrong. Yeah.
I find examples of this in my own life constantly, where I'm like, oh yeah, like I met with Hanna the other day, like she, like someone could be like, oh, like was she wearing blue jeans? I'm like, no, they were black, and like you were wearing blue jeans, like.
Well, I wasn't wearing blue jeans. I was
absolutely
black,
not. But it's like, it's even possible to like feel that you specifically remember something, like not even that like you're like, oh, I don't know, but that you specifically remember something and it's completely wrong.
Yep.
And that has happened to me on a number of occasions in non-traumatic events.
Okay. Yeah.
So
that's a fair point.
That's just, I really feel that that's important. So anyway, Jeffrey couldn't really think of why there would be no blood or fingerprints on the phones. He said that the blood could have been, like, he thinks, like, maybe the blood had dried on my hands by the time I had gone to the phone. I think blood dries pretty quickly.
But wouldn't it still, like, transfer over to the phone?
It depends, but I think then later we see in the hearing, we'll find out about more of the fuck-ups, and it's like people had been touching the phones.
Yeah, before they checked it.
Yeah, so I'm just going right now with, like, what they are...
Like what they're presenting.
What they believe at the time. And I think that even the detectives don't really understand the extent of the fuck-ups.
Yeah, the shittiness of the crime scene handling.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the detectives suggested that he take a polygraph test. The three of them went back and forth for a while about this. Jeffrey was asking about the validity of polygraphs and their rate of false positives. And it kind of seemed like he wanted to do it, but he was nervous that his emotional state would interfere. again, I think this is completely reasonable.
Very
if
valid,
I was
yeah.
in his position, I would not take a polygraph.
Yeah.
It can't really do that good for you, and it can do like quite a bit of bad
Yeah.
for you, at least in the eyes of the detectives, even though it can't be used as evidence in a court. But he agreed to take it, but then after he left, he called and told them that he would not be taking it.
Okay.
And then pretty much right after the interrogation, news broke that Jeffrey was the prime suspect, and that is when Jeffrey decided that he needed a lawyer.
Oh, yeah.
So, and it broke in a really shitty way for him, where he like had gone back to work at the hospital, and he was like in the cafeteria, and then like on TV was like, Jeffrey Macdonald is the prime suspect, and then everyone was like,
everyone just looks over at him.
He's like, all right, well, fuck. Okay. So, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, whenever there is a criminal charged by military authorities, an investigating officer is appointed to inquire, quote, as to the truth of the matter set forth in the charges, end quote, and to make a recommendation, quote, as to the disposition of the case, end quote. So this is what they call an Article 32 inquiry.
Okay.
And it's like a military version of kind of like a grand jury, like not like a trial, but it's to like judge if the case has merit to go forward. And then if they judge that it does, then the person will be court-martialed.
Okay.
So, and I think I have to, in my notes, if anybody doesn't know what a court-martial is a general court, a general court-martial is the highest court level. It consists of a military judge, trial counsel, the prosecutor, a defense counselor, and a minimum of 5 officers sitting as a panel of court-martial members. An enlisted accused may request a court composed of at least 1/3 enlisted personnel, and an accused may also request a trial by a judge alone. So it's very similar to a regular trial, but it's within the military jurisdiction.
Okay.
So Colonel Warren V. Rock was chosen as the equivalent of the judge, and he would decide through a hearing whether or not he believed the case had any merit. And in the event that he decided it would, Jeffrey would get court-martialed. And if he decided it didn't, then it just would get dropped.
Okay.
It had become pretty common practice for Article 32 hearings to be merely a formality, with the prosecution leading the way, and it was usually unopposed by the defense. But the issues were never as large as this.
Yeah.
But Bernie Siegel, who was Jeffrey's lawyer, was not having any of that. He went super hard on his cross-examination of the prosecution's witnesses and picked away at everything, which, again, this is not common in our Article 32 hearing, so I think everyone was, like, really, like, what? They were, like, totally taken aback by it. And honestly, it was not very hard because, as I said, the investigation had made a lot of mistakes. So in the earlier lab fuck-ups that I talked about, all were involved, but then also things like the crime scene was completely contaminated. There were so many officers, there were no records of who was coming and going, and everyone was touching everything, using the bathrooms. As I said, mud and grass were tracked all over the place, and there was no way to tell if that was from the attackers or the officers. Officers at the scene had used the phone that Jeffrey had used to call the authorities, so the whole thing about there being no fingerprints or blood had no legs. The pathologist didn't get fingerprints or hair samples from any of the victims, so likely there were many fingerprints and hair samples in the apartment which could not be identified as coming from the family or the alleged assailants. So they were buried before they took fingerprints, and they didn't take fingerprints.
So bad. What the hell?
On top of that, most of the fingerprints from the scene had degraded before they were even looked at by the fingerprint analysts. The upright pot plant that Gerber had focused on in the interrogation was found to have been flipped upright by an ambulance driver.
Oh my god.
Who then continued to sit on the couch.
Why?
The hair sample that they had used to match to Colette's palm had been taken from the collar of one of her jackets. So, like, not definitely definitively one of her hairs.
Yeah.
Just they assumed it was her hair. The hearing turned into such a shit show that halfway through the first day, they barred all media and spectators because they were so embarrassed.
That's embarrassing.
From that point on, the prosecution had been ordered not to speak to the media, but Bernie Siegel went out at every recess and he talked about everything, obviously from his and Jeffrey's perspective. He was able to shape the entire media perspective, and the army was made out...
Wait, this was Jeffrey's defense lawyer?
Yes.
Okay.
And the army was made out to be complete incompetence.
Well, I mean, the evidence is there.
Is not unwarranted.
Yeah.
But Bernie also started with his own defense, and that's when things really started looking up for Jeffrey.
Oh, okay.
He called a witness, a military policeman named Kenneth Micah. Kenneth, he had been one of the first responders to the scene, and on his way, he claims that he saw a young woman with long hair and a floppy hat standing on the street corner at 3:50 a.m. He thought it was so strange that had he not been on his way to an emergency, he would have stopped to question her. When Micah heard MacDonald's description, he immediately informed the MP lieutenant of the woman that he saw and urged him to dispatch someone to find her and bring her in for questioning. The lieutenant failed to do this and later claimed that he didn't hear Micah say this. Later, it also came out that the prosecution had asked him not to mention this woman in the testimony.
So, potentially hippie woman.
It's a woman that matched the description, who he said, go find her, and they ignored him. And then, knowing that he had this information, they were like, don't say that on the stand.
What the fuck?
So that's extremely sketchy.
Yeah.
At one point during his defense, Bernie Siegel pronounced that he and his wife would be offering a $5,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest of the murders. After this, at the motel he was staying at, he ran into a young man named William Posey, who had told him about a girl he knew, and her name was Helena Steckley, which I think I'm probably pronouncing wrong. I'm going to call her Steckley. I don't know.
One of those, maybe.
So, Posey told Siegel that at the time of the murders, he had been living next to Helena. And she was often seen wearing a long blonde wig, a floppy hat, and tall boots.
Oh, well, okay.
Which, and let's just put it out there,
those are pretty common.
Yeah. This was a pretty common way to dress at the time. But he said that she was a known drug dealer and drug user, and was a known member of a, quote, witch cult.
Oh, God.
And he claimed that on the night of the murder, he heard her coming home in a car at around 4 a.m., and she was with 2 or 3 guys, and they were loud and giggly when they got home. Posey
what
also
the fuck are you giggling about?
Well, if they didn't do it, who knows?
Yeah, just giggling. Just living their lives.
Yeah, it's everything can look either super incriminating or
just be
like
totally
if you are
normal.
giggling or sorry, if you are guilty, but if you're not, then it's like, okay, it's a normal thing that people do.
She's in her witch cult.
Chilling on drugs.
As one does.
Exactly. Posey also claimed that she could not remember where she was that night, and that because she was too hopped up on LSD and mescaline, and was getting super sketchy after the fact because she had been questioned by police. So we're noting here that this is a person that the detectives know about.
Mm-hmm.
They've interviewed her.
She matches up with the description, but also, even if she hadn't done it, she's on drugs and deals drugs, so obviously she's not really gonna, she's gonna be sketchy just based on that with the police.
But he was saying that she was sketchy because she'd been questioned by the police. And he also alleged on the day of the funeral, she had worn all black and hung funeral wreaths on their porch and behaved as if she were in mourning. And lastly, he claimed that weeks later, when he asked her how she and her boyfriend were doing, she said, quote, well, we can't get married until we go out and kill some more people, end quote.
Okay. The fuck?
Wait, Helena,
is this alleged, or she for sure said this to somebody?
This is what somebody else is saying she said.
Oh, so you can't really know for sure.
No, and we can't know anything for sure, really. So Bernie cross-examined William Ivory about Helena, and it was pretty legendary. He asked him extensively about when Ivory had brought Helena in to be questioned. It seemed clear through his testimony that he had hardly cared to question Helena and took everything that she said at face value, even though she was clearly being very evasive and vague. He didn't check out anything that she said or even take notes. He basically said, Bernie said, did you take notes? And he said, no. Basically, he said that he started taking notes and then she, got really weird about it, so he, put his notes away and, had no notes. She admitted to being out that night. She claimed to be driving around alone and said that she couldn't remember anything because she was high on marijuana. She admitted to having and wearing a blonde wig, tall boots, and a floppy hat, but claimed that at some time after the date of the murder, in various ways, she had either trashed or given away each of these items. She was not questioned further. She didn't want to testify, and since it was a military trial, she could not be compelled to. Ivory had no knowledge of anyone investigating Hanna further. MacDonald testified for 3 days. Notable things from his testimony include some aspects of his story changed slightly. He said that he took a bunch of time to write out the sequence of events, and it helped him remember things more clearly. For example, he washed his hands and looked at his wounds in the bathroom mirror, and he also washed his hands in the kitchen sink. He says that now Colette had been propped up when he found her and that he had laid her flat, and in his original story, he didn't move her at all. But this whole washing hands and like looking at his wounds in the sink, I think is him like trying to make sense of the blood,
the crime scene,
blood found on the sink that they were claiming is from him inflicting wounds upon himself.
Right.
He admitted to sleeping with other women during his marriage and recounted 2 events. He tried to make them sound like no big deal. He said
it's a big deal.
Yeah, and it's not the extent of it, let's just say.
Okay.
He said that he was sure that the paring knives didn't come from his house, and he was sure that they never had an ice pick. He also said that it's possible that a piece of wood/club could have come from his backyard from that pile. He appeared very genuine and believable. He cried when speaking about his family, and he said that he loved his wife more than anything in the world. Let me just go to page... Oh, actually, I need that, but page 267. Back to Fatal Vision. I will read an excerpt. Sorry, I did not know what I should be reading here, so I have to figure it out. Okay, so this is what Colonel Rock had to say after the hearing. So Colonel Rock was quite obviously impressed by Jeffrey Macdonald, by his military bearing, his obvious sincerity, and the sense of loss and sorrow that he communicated so effectively. In a report filed on October 14, 1970, slightly more than a month after the conclusion of the hearing, the investigating officer wrote, quote, "After listening to the lengthy testimony of the accused and closely observing his actions and manner of answering questions, it is my opinion that he was telling the truth," end quote. Colonel Rock also wrote, quote, "A significantly large number of character witnesses testified in behalf of the accused, covering a lifespan from age 12 through high school, college, medical school, internship, and military service. They testified to qualities that made him seem what can be best described as the all-American boy. Considering all known facts about the life and previous history of the accused, no logical motive was established. Because of the manner in which the victims were murdered, it is reasonable to conclude that the crimes were committed by persons who were either insane or under the influence of drugs. The accused was subject to 2 separate psychiatric evaluations. Although there is a 4-month time span between the 2, there is striking similarity in the conclusions. Basically, they believe he is now sane and was sane on the 16th to 17th of February. Both feel, that the accused was not trying to hide any facts from them, and that had he been, they would have been able to detect it. The accused psychiatrist stated, in addition, that the accused was not capable of committing the crimes. Explanations for any discrepancies in Macdonald's story are logical based on the testimony of the psychiatric experts, the time factor, his natural attempts to forget the horrible sights of February 17th, normal human failure to remember routine actions, and the confusion following the blow to the head. Taking into the account also the testimony in regard to Hanna Feuer, the inadequate preservation of the crime scene, and the abundance of investigatory mistakes, Colonel Rock concluded in his report with 2 recommendations. 1, that all charges and specifications against Captain Jeffrey Macdonald be dismissed because the matters set forth are not true. 2, that appropriate civilian authorities be requested to investigate the alibi of Hanna Feuer, Fayetteville, North Carolina, reference her activities and whereabouts during the early morning hours of February 17th, 1970. So that was how that concluded. And Jeffrey is quoted as saying, quote, "This is no victory. My beautiful family is gone and their killers are still at large. I'd like to get those people. I don't understand why the army didn't try harder. I plan to do a lot of investigating. I think they should get the death penalty if they are caught. They made their decision when they killed my family and they should pay for it," end quote. And that is where I will be leaving part 1. We are still welcome to discuss.
Wow. That's crazy. What I'm thinking too is like, could he have overpowered his wife so effectively?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She was 4 to 5 months pregnant.
Yeah.
She would have been sleeping. Well, no, that's not true. Going with the theory, I don't think she would have been sleeping. But he's a very physically fit man.
Yeah.
You need to do like physical activities to become a Green Beret officer. Yeah, he's a very strong, capable man. And we'll learn also he was like training with a boxing team.
Okay. Because that was the one thing I was thinking of.
Absolutely. I think he could have absolutely. Absolutely.
And the kids would have been maybe like not right there. It's not like they're all trying to fight him off at once.
No. And one of them was in a crib. I don't know that she would.
Right.
Well, I think she would have been able to get out from her bed. But a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old are no match to a grown.
For sure, the 5-year-old and the 2-year-old. But okay, well,
even combined, like even like I have a 3.5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. Like I don't even want to say it, but like they're just nothing. Like,
they're not that strong.
No, and they're not like they're not smart enough to like know their bodies enough to like.
Yeah. I mean, I really want to believe that he did not do it. You know what I mean? Like,
honestly, like
if he did,
I would rather that he did do it because that would mean that he's in prison and he should be.
Yeah.
The more terrifying.
He's in prison, so.
I mean, that's definitely ruining the case, but like,
don't spoil.
It's much more unsettling to think that he did not do it.
Because then because he got convicted and he's, what, 50? Has that been 50 years?
He's in the 70s now.
So it's been over, like, around 50 years that he's been serving time for it if he did not do it.
I'm nodding my head.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, it's a crazy start, and there's a lot more to get to.
Yeah.
A lot. This did not end here.
Because we don't know that much about their relationship yet. And that, I think, is going to be really key because you hinted to me that there's some shit in their relationship. Because from this so far, on the surface, it's like he seems like a decent enough guy. Like, okay, you work a lot. You're not really probably emotionally present with your kids. Not ideal. But there's a big line between that and
but the thing is, like,
murdering them.
It did seem like he was like pretty emotionally there for his children, and like especially like in context of like I think men and their children are a little bit different now than they historically have been.
For sure.
But like everybody was quoted saying like, you know, if he was there, like he definitely worked a lot and was not around a lot, but when he was there, he was so into the kids. He like was always horsing around with them. Like at every chance he got, he was just like being a good dad.
So if he loved his kids, would he murder them? Like, what would be the motive for, like, you know what I mean? Why would he do it? Because the husband is always the first to be blamed. So why would you bother doing it and in such a brutal way?
I think, and it's not
like, wouldn't
definitely
it be easier to make it look like an accident or something? You know what I mean? If you want to just get rid of your wife,
yes,
or get a fucking divorce.
If you've already bludgeoned your wife because you got in a fight and you got angry for whatever reason, and then you're like, okay, how do I make it look like, how do I have one story that can all be consistent?
Yeah.
If you're gonna kill your kids anyway, doesn't it make more, like, why do what makes the most sense?
I mean, I guess so. The thing that I feel like is almost incriminating for me is the fact that his brother was so violent too. Because then it's like, what was going on in their family that we don't know about? Because, like, the average person, their parent dying is not going to send them into a quote-unquote schizophrenic rage where they're attacking their mom. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think, and I really don't know too much about this alleged schizophrenic break. And I think also we have to be really careful when we, like, talk about like psychiatric evaluations from 1970 because as you know, remember that Herb Baumeister
one, everybody's like, fucking like whatever,
everyone who has a little break is like hysterical and schizophrenia. So I definitely don't know that it literally was schizophrenia, but also if it was schizophrenia, sometimes that can be genetic, and B, it can manifest itself later in life. So it's not crazy. I don't think just because because clearly I think what we can gather from the psychiatric evaluations is that Jeffrey didn't have any like psychiatric issues. He did not have any sort of mental issues. Like if he were to have been a killer, it would have been like his own like self-preservation and his own like, if anything, like kind of like narcissism, ego driven. Like I think the most plausible motive would have been like, okay, Jeffrey got married and started having kids at age 20. When he was like kind of thrown into it because of an accidental pregnancy. So he spent his entire young 20s like working his ass off at different jobs, and I'm sure having little things on the side away from his wife, but like not really getting to live his like young 20s. And now he's a doctor. Now he's got some like real prestige. I'm sure at age 26, after like working his way up and getting to the place where he is, he's like, shit, like I'm a hot ticket item. I could have any woman that I want. Women are literally like,
get a fucking divorce.
Personally, he's not my cup of tea, but like everyone's like, he was so attractive and like such a cool guy, blah, blah, blah. So, and now his wife is pregnant for the 3rd time. He's not feeling being with her. And he's like, shit, like I wasted all my early 20s and now I have this entire family. Maybe I don't, and like, I don't necessarily think that he was like, I'll just kill them. But maybe that led to resentment. Maybe that led to fighting. Maybe that led to an incident where he got upset and he ended up seriously injuring or killing Colette. And then he had to...
I mean, I feel like that doesn't just happen. Because the last question for you, because I know you're going to get more into the relationship in the next part or later on in the series, but it seems that like he didn't have a history of violence with Colette. And I feel like in the majority of these cases, there is a buildup.
Yes. And that is definitely, I think, something that is really unusual and definitely lends itself to the other side of the argument, because he had no history of violence. And even all the psychiatrists, which we will go a little bit more into, they were all quite convinced that he was not the type of person who would do this. And I think it's really... again, it's like a really sketchy thing to say, like, he's not the type of person who would do this. I think literally anybody under a specific circumstance could be the type of person to do something like this. It's just like, what is the circumstance? What will it take somebody to get to that point? But agreed, I don't think there was no history of violence ever. And like we said, his father was a very stern man, but not a violent man. His brother has issues, but I don't think that his brother was an innately violent person. I think his brother like got into drugs and like got into the wrong crowd, and like he definitely does not seem... I read his whole testimony there was a grand jury that he testified in, and he seems more like... He seems more like a lost person than like a violent more person.
Maybe volatile just, like, and not just
who would... It seems like he like fell into fights and stuff with people. Not that he was like a violent guy.
Got it.
But that's also my speculation. But I totally see that point, and I agree. Especially when you see cases where like somebody like murders their entire family or is like violent towards their entire family. So like generally there is a history. And I think that they also have decided that like it wasn't like a psychosis, which would make sense for somebody with no violent history to then explode.
Okay, I think I am still biased because I did read the Errol Morse book, and I don't know, is this spoiling to say like what Errol Morse's perspective on it was?
No, I don't. I think that's it's Errol Morse like basically refutes this.
So his perspective, his book, the whole thing is essentially trying to prove Jeffrey's innocence.
I don't know that it's, and I just reread it, and I do think that Errol Morse thinks that he's innocent, but I think that the main thing is more like that he was, because that he's not guilty,
like reasonable doubt.
Yes, because there's a difference between not guilty and innocent.
Right.
I don't think anybody can prove that he's innocent besides himself, and we can't read his mind. But like you can prove whether or not he's guilty or not guilty.
Got it. Yeah. So me coming in with that perspective, I'm already a little bit biased into thinking he didn't do it, because I remember reading A Wilderness of Error, and I was like, I read it, the summary of it or whatever, the like advertised aspect of it that was saying like, is this a wrongful conviction? And so the whole time I was reading it, that's kind of the perspective I had. And I think ultimately, like, I would rather believe that he didn't do it just because it's so excessively violent.
Yeah, but it's like then somebody else did it. Like either way, it's violent.
Freaking Helena, maybe.
Well, and then
She
even
seems
if
crazy.
so like I don't even think the question is not whether she did it, it was she was there. But and I don't want to get too into because like I would like to I have like a pretty big explanation of like my thoughts on the Aaron Morris book and his own biases, and I definitely have a bias towards Aaron Morris because I really like Aaron Morris, and I kind of think Joe is like not the coolest guy. Like I think he did some shady things, but
I think Joe is just trying to like sensationalize and exploit the story a little bit, or what?
I think he did some pretty shady stuff with Jeffrey. I think he was pretty shady about it. I will get to that.
Okay.
I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I also think that Aaron Morris has a lot of biases, and I'll get to those as well.
Maybe both. Okay, so
everybody has biases, you know?
I think this is a lot already. Super interesting case. There's so much there.
Yeah, there's so much. So this is my first attempt at a deep dive. I would love to get some feedback as to like, you know, how do you like, and, you know, listen to all the parts before you give me this feedback, but like the chronology of it all. And, you know, there's definitely a million ways you could tell this story. So if anyone has any feedback or like ideas like how to do it better next time I do a deep dive, because I definitely want to do a lot of deep dives.
Sure.
I'm definitely open to hearing any feedback.
Sounds good to me. I think I'll put it 5 out of 10. I mean, it's really fucking bad.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the most violent. This is the first part where we talk about like what happened to Colette and Kimberly and Kristen. Like that's the worst of it, and that's the most violent. And it's like to me, like that's the worst
really
part.
Bad.
Although I mean,
it's really bad.
The worst part, no, not the worst part, but the second worst part is like if Jeffrey is innocent and he's
50 years in jail. That's insane.
That's a lot.
And I assume he's still professing his innocence to this day.
I am nodding. Yes, he is.
Okay.
Yeah, let's end it there, and we'll get into more of it next week or next whenever we put it out.
I can't wait to hear what's next.
Yeah. So hope everybody's still listening and is you know gonna keep going with the next parts, and just remember
it will be out soon.
Yeah, just remember to always be safe because you never know
who's knocking.
This podcast is produced in collaboration with Lost Line Media. Artwork by August Digital. Music by Matthew Cook.